Farber. I'm happy to tell you about my work on safe, fast and concurrent proof checking. Let me start by telling you about Dedukti. Dedukti is a proof checker based on the lambda-Pi calculus modulo rewriting. There exists a number of encodings from different logical systems, such as the calculus of inductive constructions or simple type theory, to this calculus. Therefore, Dedukti can check proofs from a variety of systems, such as cock or whole light. However, the proofs exported from these systems can become rather large and therefore take a long time to check. So I asked myself the question, how can we check Dedukti proofs faster while still keeping the nice properties of Dedukti, such as a small kernel? Let me tell you about the input format of Dedukti. Dedukti reads files that are called theories. A theory is just a sequence of commands, where a command is a sentence that either introduces a new constant or adds a rewrite rule. Consider the following theory about implication. The first command introduces a constant called prop of type capital type. The second command introduces a constant for implications, and the third command introduces a constant for proofs. The fourth command adds a rewrite rule from proofs of implications to a function from proofs to proofs. How does Dedukti check a theory? It proceeds by checking each command one by one, and for each command it goes through three phases, namely parsing, type inference and type checking. The first phase, parsing, transforms a string into an abstract syntax tree. The second phase, type inference, infers the type of the left-hand side of a rewrite tool. In this case, capital type. The third phase, type checking, checks whether the type of the right-hand side of the rewrite rule corresponds to the type we previously inferred. If this is satisfied, then the command is checked. Dedukti has limited support for concurrency. In particular, it can process multiple theories concurrently, as long as all of its dependencies have been previously verified. However, for each theory, Dedukti processes only a single command at any time. So the question arises whether we can somehow process multiple commands from the same theory at the same time. For this, it is important to note that Dedukti is implemented in OCaml, for which stable multicore support is currently not yet available. This makes experiments with more complicated concurrency difficult. That is why I ventured into Rust. Rust is a functional systems programming language. And unlike other systems programming languages, such as C, Rust provides strong guarantees on memory and thread safety. This excludes a large class of bugs that frequently occur in other systems programming languages. Furthermore, Rust focuses on performance and concurrency, which makes it an interesting candidate to implement a concurrent proof checker in. So, my goal was to re-implement a core part of Dedukti in Rust that allows us to process multiple commands concurrently using threads. How is this done? Let me first reconsider sequential proof checking. In sequential proof checking, we process each command after the other, going through 3 different phases. And my benchmarks showed that most of the time during proof checking is spent in parsing and type checking. So it seemed natural for me to introduce concurrency in these 2 phases, in particular to delegate parsing to a known thread and to delegate type checking to multiple threads. Let me first consider concurrent parsing. In concurrent parsing, we have a known thread that is dedicated only to parsing, and whenever it has parsed a command, it sends it via a channel to the main thread, which only has to deal with type inference and type checking. In the best case, we could expect that this reduces the total proof checking time by the time required for parsing. However, as I will also indicate later in the evaluation, in practice, the overhead of sending commands through a channel is too large to make this strategy pay off. Next, let me consider concurrent type checking. In concurrent type checking, we create a thread pool, and whenever there is a free thread in this pool, we send a type checking task to it. In the best case, we could hope that this would reduce the total proof checking time by the time required for type checking. And as I will show later, this is actually a rather realistic thing to expect. Now, what is necessary to perform concurrent parsing and type checking? For this, I have to delve into terms. Terms are the central data structure in Dedukti. In a nutshell, a term is either a constant, a variable, an application, or a lambda or pi abstraction. Terms are inductive data types. And in Rust, to create an inductive data type, we have to explicitly use pointers. Here I show 3 of the most commonly used pointer types in Rust, namely box, RC, which stands for reference counted, and arc, which stands for atomically reference counted. These 3 pointer types differ in their properties, of which I also show 3 here. The first property is performance. The second is thread safety, which means whether we can send and use a pointer across different threads. The third property is sharing, which means whether we can have multiple references to the same pointer. I created 3 different types of terms that each use a different pointer type, shown before. And it is important to note that each of these term types inherits properties from the used pointer types. So for example, my term type that uses box takes linear time to duplicate instead of constant time. RC terms, on the other hand, cannot be used across threads, and arc terms are the slowest. Despite these shortcomings, it turns out that for each of these term types there is a corresponding task where they nicely fit. For parsing, we can use box terms because we never duplicate terms during parsing. For type checking, we can use RC terms or arc terms, depending on whether we do sequential or concurrent type checking. Next, I found that the layout of the term type has a significant impact on the performance of term operations. To increase performance, I used a technique called unboxing. This means that I omit pointers around terms that cannot have subterms. In particular, this concerns constants and variables. This technique alone reduces the runtime of type checking by up to 29% when using argterms. Now for the implementation of my work. I implemented the shown techniques in a proof checker that I called Kontroli. Kontroli is freely available and it is written in Rust. The kernel of Kontroli is significantly smaller than the kernel of Dedukti. This is an unfair comparison because Kontroli actually supports only a certain subset of Dedukti's features. Still, it shows that it is possible to implement a small kernel in Rust that is still sufficiently powerful to verify certain theories, such as hole-based ones. I evaluated the performance of Dedukti and Kontroli on several datasets. Here I show the results for two datasets exported from Hollite and Isabelle Hall. First, I evaluate the performance of Sequential, Dedukti and Kontroli. And here we can see that Kontroli is significantly faster than Dedukti. The next lines show the performance of the parsers of Dedukti and Kontroli. We can see that also here the parser of Kontroli is faster than the parser of Dedukti. In the case of Isabelle Hall, it's even 4 times as fast. This also explains to some degree the good performance of overall Kontroli compared to overall Dedukti. Next, I evaluate the performance of concurrent verification of theories in Dedukti. Here we see that this increases the performance compared to sequential Dedukti. However, even with this concurrency, Dedukti remains slower than sequential Kontroli. Next, I show the performance of concurrent parsing in Kontroli. We see that this is slower than sequential Kontroli for both datasets. Next, I show the performance of concurrent type checking, where I vary the number of used type checking threads between 1 and 8. We can see that starting from 2 type checking threads, Kontroli is faster than sequential Kontroli. And in particular, on the Isabelle Hall dataset, when we are going up to 8 type checking threads, we are getting quite close actually to the theoretical optimum, which is shown in the last line, which shows the performance of Kontroli without doing any type checking at all. To conclude this talk, let me sum up its main points. I created different term types using different pointer types, and I showed that each of these term types nicely fits a task such as parsing, sequential, and parallel type checking. Furthermore, using fewer pointers in the term type greatly benefits the performance. I also showed that parsing is one of the largest bottlenecks in Dedukti. However, unfortunately, concurrent parsing increases the runtime due to the overhead of sending commands through a channel. Luckily, concurrent type checking significantly reduces runtime, in particular up to 6.6 times when using 8 threads on the Isabelle Hall dataset. In conclusion, my work shows that it is possible to create a small and safe proof checker with fast concurrency. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And while the author is getting set up for questions, please ask your questions. Oh, there's one already in the online chat. I'll just start to ask it. What parsing technology do you use?
Okay, so I use an automatically generated lexer that is provided by an existing Rust library, and I use a hand-rolled parser. This is actually currently a topic where I'm continuing this work, and I still think there is place to improve on the results that I have shown.
Thank you. Are there any questions here locally or any more from online? While people think for a minute, I had one question, which is I was curious about the kind of so you tested your performance on these benchmarks generated from Hall. Could you say a little bit more about where you got those and what the whether there will be any properties of them that you would expect to improve or make worse your system?
Okay, so the datasets, there are several people who have written these exporters from Hall Light and Isabelle Hall. I have, for example, contributed to this proof export from Isabelle Hall, and other people such as Emilie Greenenberger have done the export from Hall Light. And these exports are currently not yet optimal, in particular because they produce these large proofs. I think that there is also, as much as there is work to be done on the performance of the proof checker, there's also work to be done on the output of these proof exports.
Right. Actually, that was another question I was wondering, which is, your aim is to do efficient, quick testing of the kinds of proofs generated by systems like Coq and Isabelle Hall. Is there something that you've learned that would suggest changes they could do to make your tool faster?
I think that actually the biggest problem that we had that was with the tools from Isabelle Hall, and there is actually the problem that some of the proofs in Isabelle Hall are just getting so large that the proof export actually breaks down at some point, if you want. And I suppose that this is also because this functionality of proof exports has been adapted in kind of post hoc way. So it was not thought to be integrated from the start. So, and this is related to the automated reasoning integrated in Isabelle Hall. I suppose that if a proof assistant that was thought from the start with support for proof export, then this would also shape the development of the automated reasoning in the proof assistant. But alas, because this proof export has not been traditionally a focus of proof assistants, this is why the proofs are getting also large, because so far nobody has cared. We only have, since about 1 year, the technology to actually do these proofs, export them, and to also check them in a different system, at least for Isabelle Hall.
Right. I would be curious to see how this translates to Coq, for instance. Any other questions, either locally or on? Yep, one from the back, just a second.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I'd expect whether or not it's worth spinning up a new thread to depend on the size of the term that you're checking. Did you do any experiments to determine when that's worth it?
I did not do this experiment. I just basically used some given routines for parallelization that do that I'm using in a very trivial way, actually. And there is actually a lot of performance optimizations to be done still, but I did not do several of these because my goal was to create a proof checker that is small. because I consider this to be a very important property. So there would be, as I said, many things that could be still tried if one was, if one would be willing to sacrifice the smallness of the kernel.
Great. One last question that I was curious about this. So you have implemented Dedukti in OCaml and then switched to Rust because it didn't have support for multi-core. But OCaml is getting multi-core, and so I'm curious. Would you go back and what would it be worth it?
This is a very dangerous political question, I would say, first and foremost. I would say that even if OCaml would get now today a multi-core support that is stable, it would still not be trivial to port Dedukti to a concurrent setting like I did in Rust. And that is because OCaml has global mutable references. And that means that the state of the verification could be updated from several threads at the same time. And this could lead to horrible, horrible bugs. And it is not actually trivial to find all of these places where this might become a problem. So for a concurrent program, I still would not go back to using OCaml right now because of this very problem, that it's not possible to ensure by the type system that no concurrent access to the same mutable variable is possible. Rust provides their really very strong guarantees that make concurrency a very gratifying thing to do.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Let's thank him once more.